Well, Dr. Moore, thank you so much for joining us today. And first I'm just going to ask you to give us a little bit of an overview of who you are, where you live right now, where you've worked.
Okay, right now I'm a professor emeritus in instructional technology here at Tech. I've been retired for a number of years, but I have probably over 30 some years of experience here at Tech. I occasionally work with the faculty on a continuing basis when they need warm bodies or when they need somebody to occupy a chair or something. So I'm still involved to a certain extent, but not like I used to be.
How did you get interested in this field, sort of big picture? How did you get into this?
I started out as a public school teacher. I taught history in junior high, and by its nature, history sometimes is not a very exciting thing to sit in a class and listen to somebody talk. So I was trying to figure out how I could make my class more interesting. And in those days, I got interested in some really advanced technologies like 16 millimeter projector and overhead projectors, those really high-tech kinds of things. And I found that I could actually make it a little bit more interesting to the students when I'd show films, or when I'd show maps, or when I would find quotes from famous historical people that maybe even, if they were reasonably current, audio recordings and things like that. And I got into it that way. Because I was probably the only one in the school that was actually using films and other kinds of media, they made me audiovisual director just because I knew how to turn on the projector, and I knew where the overhead projector was hidden in the school. So I was made that, and then I later found out that hey, there's actually a field that dealt with this area. So that's kind of how I got started in it.
Okay. Could you talk a little bit about the primary focus of your research?
I think my research over the years is kind of I got into it early. It was essentially how images and pictures communicate, particularly combining that with cognitive styles. I got into it fairly early with my own dissertation, and it has been essentially I stayed with that for the most part over the years, but essentially the idea of how pictures, what are the attributes of pictures, how they communicate, what is the best way to present them, etc.
Could you talk about how would you describe your research interest and aspirations when you first started your career, and then also talk about how that changed over time?
I'd always been interested in visual kinds of things. I thought that would bring things to the students that you couldn't get by just talking about it. So I'd always been interested in it. Early on, when in my graduate program, I had a professor who was on my committee, who was one of the early leaders in the what became known as the visual literacy movement. His name was Paul Wendt. He was very much into the idea of, again, what he called the language of pictures, that pictures had actually just a context and a grammar just like the verbal. And I got very interested in that. I had him in classes, he was on my committee, and he encouraged me to do some things like that in that area. That's the reason I essentially did the dissertation dealing with visuals. And as a start, that's kind of where I started. And I got later on into my changes in terms of kind of combining not only the media attributes of visuals particularly, but cognitive style, how certain ways that people acquire information, certain ways that people identify information, and I kind of put those kind of two together. So that's how I that's what it eventually evolved into, and that's what I did for most of my time.
Okay. Could you speak a little bit more about your career path? You talked a little bit about your high school teacher days, and then you sort of moved from being AV expert.
Oh, well, yeah, using that term expert very loosely, I just happened to be the one that, as I said, knew how to turn on the projector. I was teaching, again, as I said, junior high school, and I went to a meeting once in which they were talking about this. At that time, we called it the audiovisual field. And as I said, I didn't even realize that there was a field, but people actually did this. I had no idea of that. And I heard this discussion, and I thought, that sounds kind of interesting. And so I looked locally. There was a college not too far from where I was teaching school, and this was in Central Illinois, Eastern Illinois University, and they had a master's program in audiovisual instruction administration. So I thought, that sounds kind of interesting. So I went over and interviewed, and I got into that program, and so I got my master's in audiovisual administration. I did some. I was fortunate enough to get invited to some institutes. In those days, there was a big federally funded projects called NDEA Media Institutes, and I applied for one over at Purdue University. It was a summer-long thing, and they really immersed you in all things at that time, technology, in terms of instruction, and I really got into it there. So I got my master's finished at Eastern, and then I decided this is kind of cool. This is kind of an interesting thing to do, and so I started looking around to continue, and I was accepted at Southern Illinois University in Carbondale into their doctoral program, and I went down there. Spent two and a half years there, got my degree at Southern Illinois at Carbondale, and then they have a branch campus or a sister campus at Southern Illinois at Edwardsville, which is outside St. Louis, and that was essentially my first job after I graduated. I was an assistant professor there. I was there 2 years, and then I got an invitation to come out to Virginia Tech in 1972, and have been here ever since. So that was kind of my career path.
And how has your role changed since you've been at Tech? Since you've come in anew, and then you're...
Well, I was fortunate to come in when the newly formed College of Education was in its second year, and I really got the good fortune of being able to actually set up a program, the instructional technology program. I was a faculty of one, which is kind of hard to have a program, but I got it. We started that. We started getting some students in. We were fortunate enough to have a doctoral program, and so here I was. All of a sudden, I was essentially a brand new assistant professor, but all of a sudden I was chairing doctoral committees. And I'd only seen one dissertation in my entire life, and that was mine. And that wasn't probably the greatest model ever to use. But so I kind of earned while I learned time. I was learning how to be a professor about the same time as I was being an advisor and an instructor at this level. That's kind of, and I continued to be a faculty member until a few years ago when I retired. And as I said, I still do a little bit of project work and hire when somebody's on sabbatical or something. I've been hired to work behind these people.
So I'm going to ask you an off-book question.
Okay.
So based on something you said earlier, and you were talking about looking at cognitive styles and cognitivism, and I'd really like to hear what you have to say about how the theories that you worked with most in your early research, how you feel like those have changed over time.
Well, I must admit I am and this is probably shows my age and my upbringing in terms of college, but I'm a behaviorist.
Okay.
And a lot of what we did early on in my doctoral program, particularly, was the idea of structural design, behaviorism, those kinds of learning theories, and I pretty much carried that all the way through. I probably am not the behaviorist in the model of Dr. Burton, my colleague, but I consider myself a behaviorist in that this field is actually based upon behaviorism. And I have really not probably ventured too far from that.
What would you say are the major ideas or the major approaches that stimulated your professional growth, that influenced you over time?
Well, are you talking about like trends or something, or
Trends, or something that you've seen and you thought, I want to research that more, or that changed your mind even as you were doing, you were on a particular path of research?
as I said earlier, I really have not veered too far from my early days of interest in pictures. I do think that with the coming of the emphasis on instructional design, probably it became more important how you design something rather than the medium that you used on it. And so I found that probably, but probably that's, and of course recently with everything becoming digital, that kind of changes the whole paradigm. We don't even need the individual equipments anymore. The old in the old days we had something that did pictures, and then we had something that did sound, and we had something that did both. Now it's all, it doesn't matter anymore.
Could you talk a little bit about the people, whether they're colleagues or even students, that have really influenced your career and how they influenced you?
Okay, there's a good number because I've been around a long time, but there's a group of people that I would call more general. They influence me in a general way, and then there's another smaller group that influenced me specifically. Some of the ones in the general category that were very important in my thinking and what I did was some people like B.F. Skinner and his operant conditioning and behaviorism. Obviously, what he wrote back in those times became very important to me in this field of instructional technology, because it kind of set a basis as theory. I mean, we're one of the few fields, I think, that can actually point to there is a theoretical underpinning to what we do. B.F. Skinner was an early one. Robert Mager, who essentially wrote a small little book dealing with what behavioral objectives were. It was but a very important one. And that influenced in terms of how people planned and how people looked at what learning outcomes and things like that. So that was a very important thing. A man named J.J. Gibson, who was during World War II, worked for the military and did a lot of experiments and work on images and how images communicate. I really got intrigued by a lot of the stuff that he did, and so that was one. I had mentioned Dr. Paul Wendt. He was on my committee down at Southern Illinois, and he was very instrumental in getting me really into the visual research. I mean, where you actually do research rather than just use it. And he was an early pioneer, as I said earlier, in visual language in the context of visuals. And he was very much into the early days, an organization that with like-minded people called the International Visual Literacy Association. And he was one of the early pioneers, early leaders in that. So he played a real major part. A colleague that I did a lot of work with, and probably if I have anything significant in terms of what I did with my research, was my collaboration with Frank Dwyer up at Penn State. He was a very accomplished visual researcher. He had quite a history of this, working with students. He published prolifically, and in the early days, I really got interested in what he was doing, and he was really into an area that I was interested in too. Later, I was fortunate to do some more work with him. So those are some folks. I'm sure there's a lot of people that one I should have probably mentioned that early on that influenced me in terms of getting interested in images and things, communication, was a professor called Marshall McLuhan. He was kind of what I call a pot stirrer. He got people to start thinking about the impact of media on society and what are some of the long-range implications of using technology in a general sense. And he was very popular back in the late 60s. And I found his work to be really fascinating, and he wrote a considerable amount about this. So he got me in that there's kind of a broader thing than just the technology. So those are kind of the general folks. Specifically, I had mentioned that I got my master's degree in audiovisual administration at Eastern Illinois University, and the chair of that department, and who became my advisor, was Vern Stockman. And he was an old school psychologist that had kind of gotten into this field. And he, for the first time, I thought, first of all, he pointed out that there is a field, and he got me really into the program, and he made me realize that there was more stuff out there than what I had first thought. I'd already mentioned my friend and colleague Paul Wendt. It was amazing the amount of stuff that he got me into. And then I've also mentioned Frank Dwyer. I had the good fortune over the years to be invited to work with Dr. Dwyer, and we collaborated for many years in terms of our research. His was primarily in using his research in visual attributes. I was interested in visual attributes and cognitive styles, and it just seemed like a natural thing. So we did a lot of work together, a lot of research together. We were fortunate to get a lot of publications out of it, books, presentations, etc. I was able to spend some time actually at Penn State, but our collaboration continued on for a good number of years. I consider probably in terms of a academic thing, that's probably my highlight of my career, is working with Frank Dwyer on his visual, with his visual. As I said, we were able to get lots of stuff out, and it may have been because he already had the name, and I was just there. But we did a lot of things. As I said, we had books and publications and presentations.
Well, I guess I may be asking you just to reiterate this, but what do you see as your greatest accomplishment?
Well, my greatest accomplishment, in terms of probably a pure academic thing, it would probably be my work with Frank Dwyer. Probably, though, in terms of my greatest accomplishment is, in my mind, people may disagree with this, is my work with graduate students. I was fortunate over the years to have a good number of really top-notch students. And I think every teacher wants their students to be better than them. And I was fortunate, I think, that I have, over the years, I think most all of the folks that I had any contact with in terms of advising, I advised a great number of doctoral students over the years. And I think that probably, if there's a legacy, or if there's something that I think I really accomplished, was, and it's not necessarily me, it's the work that my grad students did. They all are productive. They all turned out to be really super people. I think that probably if there's any kind of a long-lasting thing, it won't be what I wrote or what I did, but it'll probably live through my students that I had. So that was. I should also say that. Saying that, I also had the good fortune to have, over my years, particularly here at Tech, just some super colleagues. I mentioned Dr. Burt and Dr. Lockie, and some of these folks over the years it were just terrific, and it made it very supporting for not only students but for faculty members as well. So I was very lucky to be in this environment.
How would you like to be remembered in the profession?
I think I would like to be remembered as somebody who worked hard, somebody who cared, somebody who was concerned about students. I think that's probably what I'd like to be remembered as.
That's fair. Is there anything that I haven't asked you, or any information or story that you would like to share?
Well, I have there's a lot of stories, and I've been around a long time. I've been, as I indicated, I've been very fortunate to have super colleagues, great students. The environment that I worked in was very supportive of not only your academic interests and your concerns, but also personal kinds of things. I could not have found a better place to work than here at Virginia Tech. I mean, I had some opportunities over the years to go other places, but I didn't see any advantage to, because I felt I had such a good situation here.
Well, thank you so much
You're welcome.
for coming to talk to us.
You're welcome.